Hello, economics students. Today I want to take a deeper look into the supply and demand graphing. We're beginning with demand, and as you'll recall from our last lessons, when we graph demand, we have two axes. We have one axis labeled P, which stands for price, and another axis labeled Q, which stands for quantity. Our P axis will always be vertical, going up and down, and our Q-axis will always be horizontal down there at the bottom. And then the actual demand line or demand curve will be sloping downward somewhere between the P and the Q axes. Now, as you'll recall as well, as you raise the price of a product, let's say our pricing point is right here on the axis. If we raise it up to here, then the quantity that is demanded will also decrease with a price increase. It would go basically from here, where my cursor is, to over here, because the price increase has caused a reduction in the quantity demanded for the item. Now, a change in demand, as we talked about yesterday, means that there is an entirely new demand line. Movement along the demand line does not represent a change in demand. That just represents a change in quantity based on a change in the price of the product. But that's not a change in demand. Demand is the entire line or the entire curve. What would represent a change in demand would be if we did not change the price of the product, but the quantity demanded were to change. Let's say that something costs $1, and if something costs $1, we would anticipate 1 million people would buy it. Let's say that all of a sudden the price stays the same, it's still $1, but now rather than 1 million people buying it, only 900,000 people are buying it, or maybe 1.1 million people are buying it. So the price didn't change, but the quantity demanded did change. That represents a change in demand, and that would result in the entire demand line shifting, or in other words, a new demand line. So how would we show this graphically? And this is what I really want you to pay attention to in today's lesson. It's really important that you understand how to graph a change in demand. And it's going to look like this. When we have a change in demand, we're going to have a new demand curve or a new demand line. The original line we're going to label now D1, and the new demand line we're going to label D2. And what I'm showing you here is an increase in demand, and sometimes we call an increase in demand a rightward shift. It shifts to the right, and you can see I have added an arrow here to represent that shift to the right. Whenever we have an increase in demand, I want you to have two demand lines, one labeled D1, the original demand line, and the new demand line labeled D2. And I also want you then to include this arrow showing the direction that the demand line shifted. So what we see here is a right shift in the demand line, and that represents an increase in demand. Now, make sure you do it like I am showing you here. Look at the arrow that you see. That arrow is horizontal. It doesn't point up, it doesn't point down, it's horizontal. Okay? I do not want you to do a line like that to represent an increase in demand. I do not want you to have an arrow pointing up, or if it were a decrease in demand, I don't want an arrow pointing down. I don't want it pointing up. I don't want it pointing like this at a diagonal. I want it to always be pointing either to the right for an increase in demand or to the left for a decrease in demand. And here again, I'm showing you how I want you to reflect this graphically. In this case, on the decrease, here we have D1 at the higher demand area, and it decreased to D2. I have an arrow pointing horizontally to the left, so a decrease in demand shifts the demand line to the left. And again, I do not want you to have an arrow pointing down representing a decrease, or an arrow pointing horizontally down. I always want it to be horizontal. Now you might be wondering, why is that a big deal? It will become a big deal as we get into the supply side of this equation. Right now we're just dealing with demand. But if you start making arrows pointing down for a decrease or up for an increase when we're talking about supply, it's going to confuse things. So let's just get into the habit of always having your arrows pointing either to the left for a decrease in demand or to the right for an increase in demand. And with that, I'm through with this lesson. I want you to check Canvas. I believe there is an assignment for you in Canvas if you're not in class. And you guys have a great day today.